Dear learners, today we are going to have discussion on dimension of sustainable development. You know, in the last last session, we have an understanding on the concept of sustainable development and its different pillars or principles of sustainable development. Today, in this dimension of sustainable development, we'll look into what are the basic dimensions we need to understand from sustainable development point of view. As we know, sustainable development, it has been discussed by economy, social scientists, and most of the discussion are influenced by ecological thinking, by ecologists or conservationists, and by social and political philosophers. And the concept of sustainable development, it means, if you look into very simple language, it means all forms and the methods of socio-economic development whose foundation is to be first to ensure a balance between, the socio-economic system and elements of natural capital. Sustainability starts from the idea that human activities are entirely, we depend on the environment and the resources, our health, our safety, our safety, social and economic stability of society, they are very essential in defining the quality of our life, because we are looking, the human is looking towards improving our quality of life, right? So a long time to prioritize this growth, and in that time when we are prioritizing our growth, we exclude the environmental problem. This is what we learn from when we look back to our what was happened during the last 2-3 centuries. Okay, so and the important but very serious forms of manifestation of environment that's damage is because of our activities by giving more prioritization to growth. So we can look into from that point what we have understand when we study the principle of sustainable development or sustainable development, when we study concept of sustainability, we have looked into 3 important pillars, that is environmental, economic and social. So these 3 important pillars, you have learned that these have a very unique interrelations. We need to balance the relation of these 3 particular pillars. So the dimension, we can look these as a dimension also. So first, you can see that when we talk about dimension of sustainable development, you can talk about the environment as a dimension, the economic pillar as a dimension, and social pillars as a dimension. However, the basis of for all these 3 dimensions is more reflected in the moral of humankind's responsibility towards maintaining the nature. So number of authors propose different dimension of them. You will see, as I indicated, that that moral dimension we can look from as a responsible human, looking into the way we are extracting or we are impacting this, giving negative impact to the environment for getting our own benefit. So bringing sustainable development needs our moral responsibility. So we can look from moral dimension in the same way as we know that there are 3 important pillars that I have mentioned, that ecological, social and economic, that can be taken as a different dimension than legal, technical and political dimension, right? So from that point, which is proposed by different authors, so we can club in this way, we can look in this way that there are 7 important dimensions if you look into the present era of climate change, that is environmental or ecological dimension, economic dimension, social dimension, the technical dimension, the moral, legal and political dimension. So let us look into how we have to look this dimension, how we have to maintain sustainable development, how to achieve sustainable development. So we need to understand this dimension, the integrity of all these different dimensions. So when we look into environmental or ecological dimension, as you know, an environmental sustainable system means when we talk about that dimension, we're talking about sustainable development of that particular dimension. So when we talk about environmental ecological dimension, that is about environment and sustainable system. So when we are looking forward for an environmentally sustainable system, we must maintain a stable resource base. Now, because we entirely depend on the resources. So we have to avoid over-exploitation of renewable resources system, or we can say environment and sink function. So depleting non-renewable resources only to the extent that investment is made in adequate substitutes. That includes maintenance of biodiversity, atmospheric stability, and other ecosystem function, which are not ordinarily classed that ecosystem function. We always talk about economic value of those ecosystem function, which we need to understand that things, which we sometimes due to human negligence we do not count this ecosystem function as economic resources. It talks about conservation of nature, conservation of landscape. So from the ecological perspective, as we know that both population and total resource demand, it must have a limited in scale, and the integrity of ecosystem and diversity of the species has to be maintained. The conservation of natural capital is essential. The reason is that we entirely, with the human or social system entirely depend on natural capital for our sustainable economic production, and in one side that has to be maintained because we need to give that intergenerational equity, means for the future generation also. So the conservation of natural capital is very important, since our society needs entirely depend on natural capital to the environment for sustenance of our economic production and to maintain intergenerational equity. But unfortunately, the market mechanism exists do not operate effectively to conserve natural capital, but they tend to deplete and degrade the natural capital system. However, not only the conservation of nature is connected with the ecological dimension of sustainable development, it also indirectly relates to the more general matter of shaping the spatial order. That's why we're talking about landscape. So, also to proper creation and maintenance of areas that is habituated by human beings. So this is touching all other dimensions, especially the social relation between different peoples, among different peoples, its relations to the environment, right? So that's why we need to understand that there is relation between your conserving of your natural capital or economic natural capital, or the dimension of this ecological or environmental dimension that has a direct relation with social dimension. The social environment, it may also have experienced degradation in just the same way we are degrading our natural environment. The environment in question in this, particularly in the social dimension, it comprises a large number of factors, including your custom and belief system, your tradition, your culture, your spirituality, your interpersonal relation, and living condition. Even human relationship with nature have their social dimension, as I indicated that. Since all different kind of activity oriented toward the environment are mediated by our socio-cultural models in a place in a given society. That's why we have different society, different culture, different spirituality across all environmental condition. For example, the culture, the social dimension that exists in Himalayan area is different from that of the Western Ghats, and that exists in the desert in Gujarat or Rajasthan is very different from that of the eastern part of the country. So the social environment needs to be safeguard the fundamentals upon which the existence of an individual is based in both its material and spiritual aspect. So when we talk about the social dimension of social service like health, education, gender, and other accountability as a part of the social dimension. So to bringing this equity, the issues of equity and equality, and then we need to understand basic needs, focus on basic needs, and equity and development. And that is well represented in United Nations Development Program series of human development reports. Go back to the concept of sustainable development, you will see that it raises the issues of whether present lifestyles are acceptable, whether there is any reason to pass them on the next generation. Because intergenerational equity must go hand in hand with intragenerational equity. So a major restructuring of the world's income and consumption patterns, it may be very necessary precondition for any viable strategy for sustainable development. So the pattern of development that perpetuates today's inequities are neither sustainable nor worth sustaining. From economic dimension, from the point of view of neoclassical economic theory, sustainability can be defined in terms of the maximization of welfare over time. So an economic sustainable system must be able to produce goods and services on a continuing basis to maintain manageable levels of government, external debt, and to avoid extreme sectoral imbalances which damage agricultural or industrial production. So you will see the this relation with when you talk about agricultural damage of agriculture, that's related to your quality of environment, means environment and dimension. In a simple definition of sustainability from economic point of view, it is also defined as a rate of economic growth in which the saving rate exceeds the rate of consumption. So you should save more than your consumption. This definition, if you look into this definition, it basically relies on an understanding of the various resource type is essentially equivalent or interchangeable, means substitutable. Thus, at least some natural resources might be used up without impinging upon sustainability, as long as they are converted into other resources, say financial or manufactured ones and safer invested one. The idea that a resource type could be freely or generally substituted for one other serves to indicate that relatively little attention was paid to natural resources by neoclassical economists. A significant additional drawbacks of the inclusion of economic dimension in the definition of sustainability is that a purely economic approach is incompatible with a long-term thinking required to attain intergenerational justice. So a human development approach emphasizing the issues of basic needs and equity is well grounded in the history of economic theory. That's why we always talk about the basic needs and the equity. So that's why this is also related to that basic of social dimension from the point of social dimension. So if you look into the three important dimensions, that is environmental or ecological dimension, then comes to social dimension, then economic dimension. It clearly shows, you will see that this is an integration of economy and ecology is required, right? Because your economic you will get from the environment, that is from ecology, and how can it achieve your integration of economy and ecology is this can only be achieved with the third component, existence of the third element, that is the social dimension. Can we combine economy, ecology, and social perspective to provide a new vision of development in the 21st century? This is the big questions. Though we know this economics, ecology, and society has to be integrated, but these bigger questions are in front of us. So when we look into the history of the human civilization after industrialization or during industrialization, we have seen that technology play an important role in degrading the environment. But then again, and when we realize the degradation, what we have done, that directly or indirectly affecting to us, in that also we are trying to utilize our knowledge, developing a number of technology to minimize the environmental impact in one side, and on the other side to gain economic growth, to improve the society. So we need to understand a technical dimension again. So, well, nothing may contribute more to the degradation of the environment than the development of new technology and associated industry. This is what we have seen. So, and we have seen that the important salience in this respect is that there can be no utilization of the environment and obtainment of natural resources without at least some attendant of negative changes. So that's why we need to understand technical dimension. We know technology, we have destroyed the environment by using technology. Now, in front of us, we must try to find out that technology to minimize the impact, to understand the imbalances exist in three basic dimensions of sustainable development, that is ecology, economy, and social. While the negative aspect will always be with us, it is possible for the damage done to the environment to be minimized. That's why I'm talking repeatedly. I'm talking about benefit and limitation of technology, right? So in that context, the technical science should play an important role. For example, environment and engineering should play an important role. In the beginning, we have, when we talk about these three important dimensions, that society, social, economy, and environment, we understand that the society have to play an important role in bringing the sustainable development. So if you look into the principle of sustainable development, you will see it is something like an ethical imperative. So no system of ethics had been required to consider the possibility of global destruction of the environment, as you know, and the global condition of humanity existence or the likelihood of its survival into the more distant future. No, that is thus the new circumstances had to mean a qualitative metaphysical change in the very nature of human activity. So you can look those dimension under this moral dimension, which is very imperative to understand the responsibility. One is that refers to the existence of a future for humankind at all. So we need to understand the moral of our moral for our next generation. Means our moral responsibility to think for our next generation. Then other is the second dimension is that it refers to the condition of prevailing in the future and there to be the quality of life. Then prevailing condition, we need to understand that prevailing condition would be. So first is you should know there will be a future. Then what would be their condition? So that looking into these two dimensions, we have to understand our moral responsibility of bringing sustainable development. From the sustainable development point of view, it is a moral reflection founded upon the criticism of the human technological might. So the power that is destructive not only to humankind but also to the nature. The protection of the nature, is connected with the ecological dimension of the development in question. All the dimensions of sustainable development, as you know, are linked with diverse legal regulation through in no situation other than legal, and then the economics is this in this way. Economics also so strong because of the legal dimension, and you will see that legal dimension. If you look from sustainable point of view, you will see written or unwritten these beliefs and cultural systems, culture and social system exist. That was existed as we call the wisdom that is also a point at a, informal legal dimension. Then you will see in the modern world, we have fees and taxes to maintain to maintain the balance between this environment, social and economic, and this moral dimension. For example, we have fees and taxes for discharge of pollutants to the environment and for using environmental resources in accordance with the polluter pays principle. So these are the important dimensions we need to look. Then we need to bring more grants, subsidies, for example, subsidies for environmental projects and extending of credit to pro-environmental investment. So in such kind of activities to bring sustainable development, we need to look from legal point of view. Like we created a system of market that permit emission trading in a given area, and then incentive to the upholding of the law, and hence all kind of fine for non-compliance with standard for pollutant emission or else environmental deposit in respect of future environmental reclamation. So in this way, we can see the role of this legal dimension. Again, politics. We know that if you have a political will, then everything can be possible. So from that angle, and to look into the this modern world, you will see that political strategy for environmental protection and later to the sustainable development is very important. You will see how Club of Rome play an important role in through its publication and play an important political will to highlight the importance of sustainability in that society. And again, if you look into Agenda 21, which was one of the output, or we can say Agenda 21 action program, which was adopted by the Rio Summit in 1992, we were very difficult to implement that during the first 10 years. But after 2002 Johannesburg Art Summit, and different nations across the globe started. They have started to cook their political will, and even today's also you will see a number of agreement, disagreement. The European countries they have different political agenda, and then US have different political agenda. So there are some of the hurdles or barriers in bringing sustainable development at different level. So we need to see those the political dimension in bringing sustainable development. Then there are some of the authors brings 5 dimension of sustainability triangle as they called. They are place, permanence, person, intragenerational identity, and happiness. If you look into these 5 dimensions, you will see this looks into micro level, because when we talk about moral dimension, that is the important or keys in bringing sustainable development at individual level. So to get sustainable development, so we should initiate from the micro level, means we should act by ourselves first. So from that point of view, some author proposed this 5 dimension. First, place. People tend to see the environment as the place in which they live and interact. So we can see that place as a, and when we talk about beginning about environment and ecological dimension, you can take that as a dimension of place again here in this context. And there consequently is many environmental places as the vision people have of the space around them. Place provides an important share of the change of belonging and identity that are partly responsible for a generation of culture. It has been defined as experience of a particular location with some measures of grounding, sense of boundaries, connection to everyday life. So places, therefore, as a source of facts, identities, and behavior, they incorporate, notion of culture that I talk about. Different places, different environmental conditions have different culture, different local ways of life, And if you look into human physical and psychological health also, it depends on the places use. I mean, the people live. So place is to a certain extent, a social construct that helps people build a sense of belonging to a given culture. For example, in the COVID-19 pandemic, you will see a number of migrant labor, though they know that their economic source of income or their livelihood here in the city or metropolitan areas, but when the issues were, in a very dangerous stage, they want to go back to their own place or their original place, means their hometown, either hometown, their village. So this is an attachment they have with the places. So the role of place is very important. So the perception of place and an inseparable unity constituted by the natural cultural environment can help transcend the nature-culture dichotomy and integrate or reconcile opposite worldviews of anthropocentrism or non-anthropocentrism. So we need to understand that thing in bringing sustainable development. It could also be said that acknowledging the local condition, its constraints and opportunities is very important to devise more sustainable policies. So from culture, from place point of view, we have to keep this in mind. Then the next dimension is a permanence. The sense of belonging to a given place is often related to things that occur at different, sometimes distant moments. Therefore, it can be argued the very concept of place is not complete until we attach it a certain temporal component. Right? So the need for long-term thinking has always been acknowledged in the sustainability discourse, because when we talk about sustainable development, it is not talking, it is a long-term, long vision of development, right? We have to think for another 50 or 100 years. It is not about only for 50 years, 5 years or 10 years. So in that context, permanence is not only mere maintenance of present condition, it includes changes and improvements, right? So consequently, the dimension of permanence should have planning and consideration of the future impacts of today's action and inaction. And sustainable, whatever else it means, has to do with our intertemporal moral relation, which we have indicated for the region. Permanence could be seen as the main realm of intergenerational equity. Then as a person, as an individual, that is also very important. So as a person or an individual as a dimension, we will see merging individual and society into one single dimension. What you have seen when we look into the three basic dimensions, we put all individual is in the society, and that will have some limitation, because capturing the complexity of human behavior and relevance of personal relation for sustainability is very important. So the idea of existence of an individual person within each human being, similar yet entirely different to those around you, around them, has been a subject of very important philosophical, psychological, and religious speculation. And we know most of human beings have always had a sense of corporeal and spiritual individuality, and people have always been concerned with meaning and the nature of existence. So we need to understand the person. So the personal commitment will play a distinctive role in the pursuit of better intergenerational justice. Since humans have the freedom to be relatively autonomous from both their environment and their culture. So you will see that thing in front of us. Then that happiness and personal well-being have been also associated with aspects of life, such as we want autonomy and the freedom, achievements, and development of deep interpersonal relationships. So we'll see that individuals play a fundamental role in generation, shaping, and the maintenance of culture, and are in consequence partly responsible for the construction of a culture-dependent notion of nature. So we need to understand those individuals. Only individuals with their morals and values can achieve the sense of consciousness. The individualistic pursuit of profit, which had been actually supposed to lead to common good, could instead lead to the environmental destruction and economic crisis, as So when we look into that persons and from all these dimensions, you will see the importance of intergenerational, intragenerational, and identity to culture, place, permanence, and your happiness. That's are some of the dimensions you have to do. In conclusion, what I want to say is that sustainable development has many dimensions. They are interconnected. If we look into the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, it underlines a global commitment for achieving sustainable development. So it basically looks into three important economic, three important dimensions as we discussed, that is economic, social, environmental in a balanced and integrated manner. For instance, if you look into the economic self-reliance, which is one of the important to achieve sustainable development, and the use of energy and materials in balance with the local system or appropriate safety condition. These are important concepts that are widely identified with the ideal of social outcomes. So when we talk about economic self-reliance concept concern, not only local economic development talks about equity and involvement of a broad segment of the community in the development process, be a cooperation and a network among the productive structure to achieve socio-economic objective. The third one, that is the appropriate safety condition concept, is also related to both neighbor relation, the local natural environment, which are necessarily mutually dependent as eco-social objective to achieve a place in which to live with a degree of well-being. Point is that when we discuss all these dimensions, we have understanding that we have three major dimensions: ecology, economy, and social. But in addition to that, when we look into how this three dimension has to be kept in a balance, so we'll find out that based on this relation, we have find out that other dimensions also have an important role. We need to look in this modern world. Nature-society interaction is taking place in a very highly dynamic way. We have to look into not only to that basic three dimension, we need to look into the other dimension at different level. Moreover, we need to look into the dimension is very important, that is five dimension, the people's that place, because people, place, and permanence, etc. So that's all for today. Let us meet you in the next session.